All right, everybody. Welcome to session 2 of our Learner-Centered Collaborative Book Club. We're so grateful to have you all here today. I am so excited to dive in, but before we do so, I just want to welcome you all here. Welcome Devin, welcome our special guest, and get started. As you can see, there's a few folks in the chat already sharing. Make sure that you share your role, where you're coming to the call from, and maybe one thing that stuck out to you in this last week's reading. For some folks, this might be your second session. For some folks, this may be their first session. So we just want to make sure that everyone can introduce themselves each time we come together. All right. So as you know, our book club is going to be 3 sessions total. This is our second session of the 3. Next week on July 21st, we'll have Tom Vander Ark from Getting Smart to join us to talk about learner-centered systems and really talking about how we work on this transformational change in our learning communities. So thank you for being here for number 2, and we hope you come to number 3 as well. As we dive in, we want to keep our norms at the forefront. Here at Learner-Centered Collaborative, these are ours. We are trusted and responsible partners. We are curious and humble learners. We approach our work with courage. We build inclusive communities, and we are impact-driven. So today, as we talk about building relationships and social capital, what is one norm that you want to hold for yourself today? Feel free to post it in the chat. Helps to, for me, it helps hold me accountable. So today I want to ensure that I'm approaching my work with courage, to learn something new and be courageous. So if you have a norm that you want to hold for yourself today, go ahead and post it in the chat. Great. Thank you all for sharing. We're going to dive right in today. Last week, we did a little bit of Devin's background and who he is and what brought him to this work. Today, we're actually just going to dive right in. So Devin, I'm going to pass the mic over to you if you just want to do probably like a quick intro for folks if this is their first time joining. And then if you could so kindly introduce our amazing guest for today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Kelsey. It is so great to see smiling faces on the screen, see some old friends, some new colleagues, and I'm really, really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. So yeah, I'm Devin Vodichka, CEO of Learner-Centered Collaborative, coming to you from Oceanside, California, in North County, San Diego. Really, really grateful to be able to do the work that we do at Learner-Centered Collaborative, where we have a vision for a future where education ecosystems will empower all learners to know themselves, thrive in community, and actively engage in the world as their best selves. And we do that by partnering with educators across the country to make the shift to learner-centered education. And it's a thrill to be able to reflect a little bit on the journey. I mentioned last week, a lot of the book, Learner-Centered Leadership, is grounded in my experience as superintendent of Vista Unified School District, which is where that's my home district here. Oh, Davina's new to Vista. We'll have to chat. Welcome. That's great. If I know where you're headed to. You're going to the elementary school right down the street from my house. So looking forward to more of that conversation. But anyway, we're going to talk, a little bit about my experiences, but we're also so fortunate to have a special guest with us here today. And that's Dr. Saba Kidwai. And I'll let her tell her, a little bit more about her journey in a moment. But I'll just say that, she's a deep thinker. She's an innovator. She's a master communicator and has just a great way of connecting with others to help build a brighter future. So thrilled to have you here with us today, Saba. And why don't you tell the group, where are you in time and space, and maybe also just a little bit about your own background and your journey, and what led you into this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm here from Orange County in Southern California, and I'm just honestly very lucky to have been surrounded by incredible people that have opened doors and opportunities for me and really kind of have led me to doing the work that I'm doing now, which is how do we teach those skills and strategies to students. But I think that's how I met you, Devin, was, through a conversation about this very topic around trust and building trust in schools and, amongst people and building those relationships. And yeah, it really is the power of relationships and how through learning together, we see different opportunities open up. And I mean, Kelsey here too, who, met on Clubhouse. And so, yeah.
It's amazing, amazing. All right, so Saba, you sort of touched on this, but you and I, our paths started to connect with your research. And so maybe you can tell the group, what were you studying at that time? Why did you choose to study it? And what was that? What was the focus of the research that you were doing when we first connected?
Absolutely. So when I was a social science teacher, I taught history for about 8 years. And when I was teaching, one of the schools I came across was Design 39 campus in San Diego, public school, part of Poway School District. And I remember walking in there and being like in awe that their teachers were able to work together. And I just thought my first year as a teacher, I actually was part of a cohort like that, English and history co-taught. But I graduated in 2007. So when they had the budget cuts, they increased class size and got rid of that. And I never had that experience again. Then I was always kind of teaching by myself.
I joined this learner-centered leadership.
And so I had never had that experience again. And so when I saw that as a school, this was happening, I was just so in awe. And I just always in the back of my head, I wanted to know, like, how did they do that? Why did they do that? How did they keep it going? That was what fascinated me the most, was every single year it was growing and it hadn't fallen apart. It wasn't just those one little like happening in a pocket in isolation. And so when I had a chance to do my doctorate, I knew immediately. I actually went in to do my doctorate so I could capture the research behind why they were able to do what they did. And one of the things that emerged, one of the most powerful themes that emerged was, even though you walk in the way I did in the beginning and think, wow, look at this collaboration happening, what you begin to realize is that the collaboration is what you see on the outside, but there are so many hidden layers below. The building of trust and the culture of psychological safety were the two biggest themes that emerged, and how that opens the door for people to then really be able to thrive in a culture where they have autonomy, really be able to drive their professional learning. Like all these other things that we talk about, there are like hidden layers underneath that. And so Devin, probably one of the few people who actually read the entire dissertation, even though I tried to get him not to, because I was like, wait till I turn it into blog posts, wait till I turn it into videos, then do it. I think that really sparked that conversation, because you go to me, well, what are you going to do with it? And at the time I was at Apple. And so I was like, well, nothing, because I can't. And he was like, well, you must. And so I'm going to help you. And so that really was, I think, the catalyst to pretty much everything that I'm doing now. So.
It's such a great story there. And so you were talking, Saba, about some of the things you learned about what was under the surface. You go into a school like Design 39, you see students that are engaged, they have choice, they're doing authentic learning, in really inspiring ways. And you see that there's, this culture of collaboration. But what were some of the things that you learned about what has to be there to create that culture of collaboration? What was under the surface that was so interesting in the research?
Yeah. So ironically, it connects back to what you just did at the beginning, and that was those shared norms, right? So that was a really, really big one that emerged, because sometimes even people, when they're in those environments, it takes a bit of digging, right? To be like, okay, but what actually allows for this to happen? And so I would say there were two really big things that, again, were the research and the practical application came together. And the research part of it was Project Aristotle, right? So Google really started this. They had some teams that worked really, really, really well, and other teams that just didn't. And they couldn't figure out why. And they had previously, I think it was called Project Oxygen or something, where they did it for their managers. So they first started by looking at what makes a great manager. And that one went really well. It was easy. They got all the pieces together. But when it came to what makes a great team, they just could not hit the variable. Like, what is allowing this to happen? So they brought in some outside people to support. And what they ended up finding was it's not degrees, it's not personality, it's not skill set, it's norms, shared values that are going to guide our behavior. Literally, like how you opened up this today. And that's what they started mentioning when we went to go interview them. They started saying, well, we have shared norms. It's not, are you my best friend? It's, can I rely on you for these particular things that allow us to then build that trust and collaboration, that I can make a mistake and it's going to be okay because I know that you're going to bring this piece. I might not be the expert in this area, but I know that you are. And so I know that you're going to bring that. And I think they summarized it in one sentence that I love so much. They said, it's not that we can't do something or that we couldn't, it's we're not energized by that. And so they really begin that collaboration with that question of what are you energized by? And once you learn, that's like the empathy piece, it's learning that about each other that allowed them to build on top of that.
So this interesting thing, and I write in the book about what I call the framework for the future. You need to know your vision, your mission, your values, your goals, which helps then to establish roles and responsibilities and a plan to move forward. But part of what I hear you saying is that it's this common orientation, which sometimes is expressed as norms, shared values, goals. It's all these pieces, this where are we going? When we talk about things like values or norms, it's often, what can I expect in terms of our relationship with one another? How are we going to be interacting with one another? And so, I think what one of the things that's really powerful to me about your journey with Design 39 is we often look at these innovative schools and we look at their systems and structures and what is their bell schedule and then below that, it's what are we really trying to achieve that is so foundational, and how are we going to work with one another? That's what makes such a big difference. And we'll talk in a moment. I want to go back to relational trust a little more, but I also want to say that there is an interdependence between how we behave and those systems and structures. And those systems and structures can either reinforce the values and the aspirations that we have, or they can run against it. And in many cases, we actually have these legacy structures that are different than what we're trying to achieve. And they sort of create tension and make it more difficult to move forward. What were some of the systems and structures at Design 39 that you think reinforced their aspirations, that were in alignment with what they were really trying to achieve?
Okay. Well, kind of navigate me if I go off track or if it's not completely what you're looking for. But I would say once they had some of the things that I just mentioned, right? This idea where people really felt confident in their strengths, right? So now I'm no longer like really intimidated per se, or now I don't feel like I'm not good enough because you're really good at tech and I'm not, or you're really good at this and I'm not. Once that component is established, which is not a one and done, right? It's ongoing, but that is the foundational layer. Once that's there, people then begin to really do what they do best as a team. And so if one person's really great at, say, like industry partnerships, and another person's really good at social emotional learning, they can now really complement each other without feeling like, well, I need to do what you're doing and all the other things as well. Like that mentality is gone of being an individual. But now they used to say it this way. They said, when we put an idea on the table, it's no longer my idea, it's our idea. So it's really big cultural shifts that they're doing, again, by building confidence in people. Once you have that, then you get to say, drive your own professional learning. Because now as a team, we know what strengths we have, we know what our gaps are, and we can design accordingly. Some people, they also shared how, some people love to read. They're always saying, oh, I read this new book last week, or I read 48 books this year. And some people don't. Some people like to watch videos, or some people like to do other things. And so when you have that culture, I think one of the things that really allowed for was they used to have something called Project Beep Beep, which is where they used to say like, okay, this is what we need to learn more about. these are the places we're going to go visit. And so it wasn't even always like taking a class or reading a book or listening to a podcast or going to a workshop or a conference. Sometimes it was like, we're going to go up to the D school and go visit them. Or, you know, there's a business around the corner and we're interested in building a partnership with them for a project our kids are doing about the environment, you know, next semester. We're going to go and look at like who in our community is thinking about sustainability and which businesses can partner with our students. So I feel like that was a really, really big piece of it. I also think the design thinking component became a more embedded part of their system as well. So they talk about how in the beginning, and this is what we see as well, right? When we're adopting new curriculums or new things, it wasn't so much we're doing a design thinking project the way it was when they started with like the cardboard, the typical way. It became, well, we design think everything. Like there's a problem. Okay, great. What are you going to do about it? Like, okay, then the kids start adopting this mentality, right? Where it's like, well, we've done our empathy work and, you know, we think this is something we should be doing and we should think blah, blah, blah. And now we're going to come pitch it to you because they believe they can. They've done their data, they've got their analysis work. So I would say when you unlock people, you ultimately unlock the potential for what you can do in your systems. Because if people don't believe they can change a system, your system isn't going to change by itself. And everybody's is going to look a little bit different. And so that I would say that and the professional learning is really what unlocks the other piece. So to me, that's what I would say. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I would say is what I saw at least.
That was beautiful, beautiful. And one of the things that I often say is, you know, the systems and structures that we have were designed by people and they can be redesigned and recreated by people. And so we often take them to be these like static, fixed constraints when in fact we created them, not necessarily like us as an individual, but we as people created them, and therefore we have an opportunity to shape them. And a couple of things that really stood out in what you said. One is this idea of they have a team structure at Design 39. They work collaboratively on just about everything, and it is strengths-based. So they're using asset framing. They're building on what energizes them. And then the roles become almost emergent based on the team and the strengths. And when you have the common orientation, you work in teams, you use your strengths, then it empowers a lot of flexibility and adaptability. And those examples, Project Beep Beep is one, is, you know, you are comfortable with that flexibility because you know you have a strong foundation of teams, relational trust, common orientation. So I think all of that is like very, very insightful. So I appreciate that. I want to go back for a moment to relational trust. And you and I have talked quite a bit about this. We've written about it together. But I talk about relational trust being the four elements of consistency, compassion, competence, and communication, and how all of those elements need to come into play to have that high level of relational trust, which then allows you to be vulnerable with one another and take measured risks that really help you to grow. Can you talk a little bit about how you saw elements of that framework, consistency, compassion, competence, communication, in what you observed at Design 39?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say one of the areas where I saw, okay, I'll share with you an example they shared in one of the interviews. There was a teacher who was a little bit newer. So at Design 39, they host a conference. And they host a conference as Design 39X, I can't remember the name. But the idea behind the conference is that the teachers are sharing with each other. So instead of bringing in all these outside experts, again, they're continuing to reinforce that culture of like, you know, each other's strengths. And so they asked this teacher, I think she'd been there for about 2 years, to present on something. And she was like, no way. Like, I need to come and learn. Like, no way, I can't present. And they were like, yes, you can, you know, and we're going to help you. And so again, by digging into, like, it wasn't like, oh no, just go do this and you're on your own. Like, here's some requirement or here's some expectation that we have, go do it in isolation. It was like, no, you can do this and we're going to be there for you and we're going to do it with you. And she was just like, you know, she was like, I did not see myself in that way. Like, I never thought that I could be one of the people like that could do something like that. And so again, I don't know if this answers your question directly, but that to me was a really powerful example of like what that type of trust and taking a risk and feeling safe really looks like, because it goes back to this, like what we were saying before. Like, I always think of this one example because it's important to remember, like, we also all grew up in a school system where only one person really was the valedictorian, right? Only one person got the answers right. Only certain percentage of people get A's. Everybody else is like a failure. And so that's a mindset that doesn't really leave you. And it didn't really occur to me how embedded that is in us until during the pandemic, Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi made one of their classes free, and anyone could join. And they usually charge thousands of dollars. And so I jumped in. And instead of listening to them, I was just reading the chat, because all those people wanted was for somebody to tell them they were good enough. That was it. That is what they essentially are charging money for, is coming to tell you you are good enough to do whatever it is you think you want to do. And so I think we forget sometimes, like, how much that system of assessment has really like messed with our mindset and our own beliefs. And so one of the best ways you can show trust and integrate those 4 elements is by really helping people see what it is that they are capable of themselves, which they oftentimes can't see themselves, and bringing in that compassion, that consistency, that communication to show them that you are competent enough to do this. And that's not something you can do when you throw something out to the board to everybody and say, go do this on your own isolated islands in your classrooms, right? Even to administrators, how many times I was at a conference the other day and somebody said, well, everybody's talking about the teachers and how they need support. Do people realize how isolated principals are? Who's our advocate, right? And so there is this like layer of like, that is what it looks like in action. I want to try something, but who's there to back me up?
Yeah, that is really powerful. And sort of building off of this concept of relational trust, I also talk about leadership is learner-centered leadership as being at this intersection of purpose, participation, and feedback. And it's a blend of self and others when you really get into that purpose and participation, and feedback is, fueling your journey. But, one of the things that you said that stands out is that how do we know our purpose as individuals? What are we doing in our school system to help us understand what are our strengths? Who am I as an individual? And I know now you're doing some work on helping learners to better understand themselves, to build that sense of self-awareness. So can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing and what you're learning about how we can better cultivate a sense of purpose as individuals, and then also how that might extend as communities?
Yeah, absolutely. But I want to do it in the context of your framework, because I really like your framework and I've been thinking about it a lot more lately. Like just the other day, I won't say who, but I had somebody and they were this is a corporation. So they were at a company dinner, and the whole day they were talking about empathy as a core cultural value, and like empathy. And something happened at the end of the day and they made a judgment on the person. And the person was like, whoa, you just spent the whole day talking about empathy. Where's your empathy for me? And so I want to go back to your framework, because one of the things that I really like about it is like where you talk about values, but you also talk about, I don't have it in front of me, but like strategy and purpose, and like the things and the roles that are assigned at something, and like the different layers that are there. Because I take your framework and I took something that I heard from an author. His name is Brant Menswar, and he writes a book called Black Sheep, right? How everybody is this individual black sheep. But one of the things that I loved, I was like, wow, if somebody took Devin's framework and the values they identified and used his concept of, well, how do your values show up every day? He said in his calendar, he marks each thing in his calendar in alignment with a value. Because if you're doing all these events and all these meetings and all these things in your day, and none of them are aligned to your values, then how are those your values? And so I don't know, maybe you share your value, your framework really quickly, because I think we say the values, but I think the implementation comes when, okay, but what does that look like on a day-to-day? What does that behavior look like day-to-day? How are we practicing that in our communication, in our interactions, in our emails, in our, expectations? That's where I think people then get that trust. Like, okay, like imagine if yesterday that person hadn't experienced that and they had experienced the empathy, they would have had a completely different mindset shift than what happened. So
right. Yeah. I love the idea of reflecting on use of time tied to values. I think that's a powerful one. And so again, the model that the framework that I talked about is vision, where are we going? Mission, how are we going to get there? Values, how are we going to behave along the way? Goals, how do we know if we're making progress? And then comes the roles, which, by the way, is very underappreciated in education. We have all these legacy roles that, again, are often misaligned with the goals, the vision, the values that we have. So we need to be rethinking roles systematically. And then once you have that in place, it's what's your plan? How are you going to organize yourselves to achieve those goals, actualize your values, live into your mission, and eventually achieve that vision that you want for the future? I'll also talk about, and in a couple of minutes, we're going to go into breakouts and let people kind of debrief on all this. I know there's a lot of great ideas that Saw was sharing, but as you go through this journey together, there's also a really important role for narrative and story and communication. And sometimes that's to inspire people. Sometimes it's to engage them, to promote, to celebrate. Sometimes it's sustaining the types of changes. And you have, I think, a natural, you get energized, I think, with this role of story and communication. Can you just give a little bit of advice to this group about how to share authentically their story to create connectedness?
Wow. Honestly, I really go back to that. This is something that I just really deeply believe, and that is that every single person, it has a purpose, and every single person is excited about something. You just have gone through so much. It is so covered up and so hidden that you have to do a lot of digging to get back to where it was, or you go through a lot of bad experiences and it comes out organically. It's unfortunately one of the two that you pick. But I really do believe that, like, once you identify what it is that you are really passionate about, like, this is something I really believe in, besides maybe like not necessarily like, it doesn't have to necessarily even be like the vision of your school or like something formal, just like you as a human being, like, what do you believe in? And that translates and plays out usually into your work, into your personal life, into all these different, like, usually it's something that people will notice about you across the board. Once you've identified that, and then you have people who remind you, like, I think it's a two-way thing. It's not just like, I'm going to do this in isolation and tell my story and always be so energized. I think it's like these little infusions that you get from people, because when you're doing that, like, I'll tell you, as somebody who does it like 9 out of 10 times, I'm just like, does anybody care? Like, oh, is this even right? Should I say this? Should I not say this? Will it help? Will it not? That I'll always get these constant infusions, like Pam's here, like I just saw her screen pop up, like these constant infusions about reminders. And so I think it's a mix of the story you're telling, but also the people you're surrounding yourself with and how you're choosing those people. We can't choose everybody who we surround ourselves with, but we do get to choose some people. And you mentioned earlier about students, but one of the things that I think helps connect people in that way is values, which is why I go back to that. Like, I just shared an article with Devin yesterday. Somebody wrote how it's really hard to build trust and relationships in remote environments. And I was like, all of my best professional relationships were built in remote environments, but they came because we connected through shared values. Me and Devin connected because we were writing about trust. I've connected with other people because maybe design thinking, maybe education, maybe my Instagram stories, I don't know, but we're connecting through something that we both have an interest in. And I think that's why I keep hitting that value component, because I think now more than ever before, it's not enough to just say, these are my values. It's, these are my values and this is how I'm going to do it. And it's interesting because people always leave that part out of Simon Sinek's quote. Yes, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. But what you do is, I forget what it is, but what you do proves what you believe. And we always leave out that last sentence. What you do proves what you believe. And so it's not enough to just say, this is my why, and that's enough. And, people come listen to me. It's how am I doing that and reinforcing that every single day. And so to me, stories are one way to do that. Every single day when I show up and I say something or I share something or I do something, it's reinforcing both for myself and for anybody else what that is. So that's my advice, just little steps, but also really find your people. Like, that is really helpful.
Yeah. I love that. Something in what you said just reminded me of one of my favorite quotes is from Margaret Wheatley, who she's inspiration for me, but she says, leadership is always dependent on the context. The context is always dependent on your relationships. And your relationships come from how you interact and what you believe and who you are. And so that creates a context which allows you to lead and helps us to be effective in getting to that future that we want to create together. Just how important it is to keep going back to our strengths as individuals and as communities, and this idea that we have to take a human-centered, a learner-centered approach in our leadership, and that really struck a chord with me, and touches a little bit on. We talked last week about the distinction between technical and adaptive change, and we are in a context of great adaptive change, and we can't solve those adaptive challenges with technical approaches, and the adaptive challenges require us to work together, which requires relational trust, collaboration. And so anyway, I really just appreciated that line of conversation, and it's so inspiring to hear from each of you. There are a couple of things that I wanted to touch on in the last couple of minutes we have here. And do you mind, Kelsey, sharing? There's a slide that has a couple of visuals that might help with this part. So one of the things that we talked about with one of the groups was how we have these pockets of progress, whether it's a school within a school district or a classroom within a school, and how we need to go from these pockets to scale is kind of a fundamental question that we have in front of us. And so this visual doesn't show it, but in the book, there's the Rogers Innovation Curve, which is a very well-known model for change, and it's overlaid with a social network graph. And I think we really need to be attending to not only promoting the innovation, those early adopters, by building on our strengths, but we also need that connectedness so that we have the surface for an exchange to get to the majority in the middle, which is really going to rely on relational trust across every one of these interactions. So I want to just remind this group about that framework. And if you want to dig into it further, there are lots of things online that you can go to. There was also great conversation, and thank you, Dawn, for kind of sparking this around the systems of the future and how we really break free of a lot of the constraints that we have in our institutional models. And so I wanted to remind the group, this is just a chart or a table from chapter 4 about some of the trends that I see, which will help to unleash our individual and collective potential. And a lot of it has to do with that clarity of purpose and then promoting teams to achieve those outcomes, which again requires relational trust. So I wanted to touch on those couple of things. And Kelsey, you can probably stop the screen share. Also wanted to get a reflection from Saba, and then I would love, Saba, for you to also tell the group what's next for you. How can they stay connected with all of the learning that's happening on your journey?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I heard that it's something we hear a lot is how these things are already happening, right? I always love that William Gibson quote, "The future's here, it's just not evenly distributed." Like things are happening, but we don't always know that they're happening or where they're happening or how they happened. And so just the importance of just sharing, I guess, that work with other people. Sometimes when you're in it, you think, well, everybody's doing this, so what, but there's a lot of value in being able to share the process and the journey of going through that change and that systems redesign.
Agreed. And so, without spoiling all of the things ahead, Saba, what should this group be on the lookout for from you in terms of how to stay connected with that learning journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say number one, we do this work so late in life, right? With our strengths and learning our values and building these networks and supports. And so one of the things I'm launching this fall is a course for high school students. It's designed for districts and schools to be able to integrate. It's completely self-paced, but we can do a lot of different models, but it's really designed to help kids build social capital, build those relationships, and understand how to navigate that in both in-person and online environments, super necessary skill set. And then the other thing is the documentation documentary. So we took the research that we did at Design 39. And again, thanks to Devin's help, I'm sure more people will be able to access it and see it. But yeah, we have a documentary coming up, not on Design 39, but more so on the teachers. And, you know, speaking of story and journey and sharing their journey, what it was like for them as educators to make this transition and the results and the impacts they've seen. And probably one of the most powerful parts about it is also the parent voices that are in there. And, you know, Devin is a featured speaker in our documentary as well. But really the goal is to take these big ideas we hear, this World Economic Forum, trending skills, world change, and actually really dig down to the nitty gritty and be like, okay, but how do teachers actually do this? So those are the two big things.
That is so great. So yeah, be on the lookout for these courses for students, which I'm really excited about, especially because they begin with strengths and that sense of self, but then extend out into how do we create connectedness. And connectedness is going to be the key for the broader change that we want to see in the world. So I'm excited about that. And then, yeah, the documentary, I've seen just a couple of clips and it is fantastic. I cannot wait to see the whole thing and be on the lookout for, you know, news about how you can watch the documentary in the near future. And, you know, it's such a privilege, Saba. Thank you. Can we give Saba a round of applause for all of her contributions? We're so grateful that, you know, we're connected on this journey and, you know, hope that for all of us, this is just, you know, one conversation among many as we move to the future. And again, going back for us to this idea that we want all learners, ourselves included, but all learners to know themselves, thrive in community, actively engage in the world as their best selves. The only way we're going to be able to do that is together. So I'll turn it over to Kelsey for any closing thoughts. And, you know, again, appreciate Saba and appreciate everybody here for the great conversation.
Yeah, thank you.